Thank you. Thank you so much. And a good day to everyone from all over the world. Welcome to this first panel, From Vision to Reality, taking stock of the Belt and Road Initiative. I think it's pretty clear what we're trying to discuss. But let me try and put a bit of context to all of this as well. I know we have people from Africa, Europe, across Asia, China, India, Southeast Asia, Europeans, etc. So we are doing this with one purpose in mind. We live in a very fractured, fragmented world, so much misunderstanding. And one good place to start is to essentially have people-to-people diplomacy. You'll all be surprised to think, well, that's happening all the time. But you might also be interested to know it's actually not that often. We are inundated with information, quite often driven by ideology from whichever side of the world we belong in, what type of government, what type of worldview, the geopolitics, etc. But there's not much people-to-people diplomacy and getting open opinions from people who are scholarly, who have no axe to grind, and are free to say what they want to say about the areas they come from, and perspectives that are quite often ignored, dare I say, in the mainstream. So that's really the context. The Belt and Road Initiative that many of you will be aware of was initiated in, I believe, in 2013. In 2013, it became the cornerstone of the Chinese foreign policy, a policy that essentially recognized that as China developed, it also had greater global responsibilities. And as it developed, it would have to impact the world in ways that it could be seen as having contributed to a global good. This was the whole basis of the One Belt, One Road initiative. That then became known as the BRI. And since then, the number of countries, I've just got some data here. In 2024, there are 140 members of the initiative, 50% of the world's GDP, and 75%, which constitutes 75% of the world's population. The Belt and Road Initiative then resulted in the formation of the AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank out of Beijing, which was created in 2016 to help facilitate all of this. And numerous studies, including that by the World Bank, have made it very clear that the initiative would essentially help with trade flows. And some estimates say that up to 115 countries would benefit from the trade flows that would be triggered and improved by the initiative. So this is some of the background to the Belt and Road Initiative. The question now is, and which is what hopefully this panel will enlighten us on, is let's take stock. Has it achieved what it was meant to do? It clearly triggered a lot of geopolitical tensions. If you look back at the last 15, 20 years and carefully look at the place we are in today with geopolitical tensions, particularly between China and the rest of the world, but you might also state between the dominant Western world and the emerging new multipolar world, it's an all-time high. And many of us who look back would thought, never have imagined that this would have happened. And part of this is essentially the rise of the rest of the world, China spearheading that, but also having to navigate a complex shifting order in which other countries have very different aspirations. So has the BRI served its purpose? Has it achieved some of the aspirations that China set out to do? How has it contributed to the economic development goals? That's part of the discussions this afternoon. So I'm very, very pleased that I'm joined today with three extremely distinguished panelists who come from, as you can all clearly see, from very different parts of the world, who will share with us their viewpoints on this question. So where is the BRI going? Let's take stock. Is it all that we're hearing about it, that's either pro or con? What is actually happening? And many people may not fully understand or appreciate its impacts. So we first have a very distinguished Professor Wang from China. And then I'm very pleased that we have Mr. Mustafa Saeed from Pakistan. And very importantly as well, Professor Efem from Nigeria. So let me start by inviting the first speaker to Professor Wang, who has written many books, is a specialist in macroeconomics, has also looked into study the economies of China and India, and is spent his adult life really researching these issues. So before I invite Professor to say a few words, let me also remind the audience, please send us your questions. We're already getting a few, and then we'll try and interact. So Professor, over to you, your view on the Belt and Road, taking stock. Has it achieved what it set out to do? Has it created a world that is more harmonized? Has it splintered the world? Has the geopolitics worsened because of it? But let's look at the economic facts, and that's where I believe you can bring us some clarity for the international audience. So take 3 to 5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nair. It's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to share the views with the other experts and the audience. So briefly, let me introduce myself a little bit more. I'm a professor of economics from the Institute of New Structural Economics at Peking University. And so I think for the Belt and Road Initiative, my overview is that I think it is a kind of a new model of South-South cooperation. It initiate has like 5 areas for international cooperation, right? Infrastructure connectivity. The second one, policy communications, and third one is trade links, and the fourth one is financial cooperation, and last one, the cultural exchanges. So I'm an economist. So I think, from the infrastructure connectivity and trade links point of view, I think over the past 10 years, I think Belt and Road Initiative achieved a lot. For example, from 2013 up to December 2023, so China itself has invested more than around $1 trillion in infrastructure investment alone in Belt and Road countries, and more than 70% of them of those infrastructure investment are on trade and energy and transportation. This infrastructure. So I think infrastructure connectivity is crucial for developing countries like many in those Belt and Road countries. And I do think data shows that the trade links among the BNR and countries also increase. In particular, the trade link between China and other BNR countries are significantly increased. So overall, I think it is achieving what most of the countries, all countries want, but still there it also encounters some difficulties and challenges. But I'm quite confident that this is a kind of right thing to do, and I'm thinking that perhaps through many kind of try and error process and also multilateral discussions, corporations, the BNR initiatives will be successful and helping all the developing countries to grow. By the way, in today's world, 85% of the total population is still living in developing country, including mainland China. And when China started its economic reform in 1978, its per capita GDP was less than 1/3 of that in Sub-Sahara Africa region. So China was very, very poor. But last year, China's per capita GDP is already over 13,000 US dollars. So I think what China's experience could be useful for other developing countries in terms of how to grow from a low-income country to middle income and finally to high income. Let me just stop here. Thank you, Nair.
Professor Yong, thank you so much. I'm going to just ask you one point that you made that I think, before we go to the next speaker. I mean, you talked about the 5 areas, right? Information, right. Infrastructure, policy, trade, culture. And what's the 5th one?
So policy and cultural exchanges.
Cultural exchanges. Could you
Yes.
just spend a minute just saying a bit more about why? I mean, infrastructure we understand, trade we understand, and you've talked about it, but policy, culture, and the fifth one was
Financial cooperation.
financial
Yeah.
cooperation. I can understand
Yeah.
the financial cooperation, but why was the culture and policy also important? If you could just give us a bit of insight into that.
Sure. So I think different countries clearly have different cultures, different histories, and have different policies, and including the policy implementations are also different. I think one big obstacle for South-South cooperation and or the development of all the developing country is kind of lack of communications, effective communications in all these areas and exchanges. People do not fully understand each other. So that's why I think policy communications and the cultural exchanges are super important. And even sometimes you have goodwill for trade and also like for investment. But if people do not really understand the culture and the history of the partner, sometimes it would have very bad consequences. So we could list many examples. So that's why I think the cultural exchanges and the policy communications are a very crucial part of the Belt and Road Initiative. There.
Thank you, Professor Yong. Thank you very much. So Mustafa Saeed, welcome. I understand you're in Pakistan today, and you're the executive director of the Pakistan-China Institute. Mr. Saeed, for the audience, it's a distinguished career in both all the policy areas, but also a track record of doing a lot of work in the environmental space. I won't go into all the details, but I think you can cover it. I mean, Pakistan is a very important country, as we all understand, critical in the whole sort of transformation of the region, the Silk Road, etc. What is your view about the experience that Pakistan has in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative? And also, if you could just touch on some of the reports one sees quite often about the impact it has, the debt trap, and all of those things. So over to you, and take 3 to 5 minutes to please give us an insight about what's happening and how it's viewed in Pakistan, which I think a lot of people underestimate its importance in the greater scheme of things of development. Yeah.
Percy, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here in this stimulating conversation, very timely, important topic. As you know, Pakistan was the flagship project of the Belt and Road Initiative when it was initiated in 2013. And it was Mr. Wang, state councillor, then foreign minister, termed it as a pilot project of the Belt and Road Initiative, then later flagship project. And Pakistan has received tentatively $32 billion of investment and ongoing as we speak. And, from a global South perspective, a country which is usually dependent on multilateral institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, unlocking access to finance was a tremendous opportunity for Pakistan and others alike. And this was a no strings attached opportunity for Pakistan. And when 2013 happened and the Belt and Road MOU was signed between the governments, Pakistan had a major energy crisis. We used to have electricity shutdowns, industries used to shut down, diesel generators were used by houses, by affluent households who could afford it. Those who couldn't used to have blackouts because there was a 4,000 to 5,000 megawatt shortfall in the demand and the installed capacity. So what immediately and initially the BRI investments did were to bridge that 4,500, 5,000 megawatts by investment in Pakistan's energy sector, in the power sector. And these were very successful investments, I would say. So that happened. And then Gwadar port is a port which some of you may know of. It's in Balochistan. It was a port which was with the Singapore Port Authority in the past, which had not really developed it, but had signed a contract with the government of Pakistan. When the China Overseas Port Holding Company signed the lease agreement for 40 years, now we have 2 industrial zones there. The largest airport of Pakistan is there, and A380 can land there. And Balochistan is the lesser developed part of Pakistan, and it's a poor part of Pakistan, I would say. So there was this huge investment in Gwadar Port. And I want to make a key point, and I think it's important for the moderator to know this. When you talk about debt, now the Gwadar Airport is not an investment and it's not a loan, it's a grant of about $250 million, right? So when we talk about the Belt and Road investments, we can't talk in a monolithic sort of narrative. You can't paint everything with the same brush. There might be some which are soft loans. There are some which might be commercial loans. There are some investments, and there are also grants. So we have to really have a very nuanced perspective and talk very specifically when we talk about Belt and Road investments. Similarly, I want to tell you about the power investments that happened, the power projects. There were some fossil fuel investments, there were some wind power projects, there were solar power projects, and there were hydropower projects, right? So there's a 80% debt financing usually, and the debt is by the sponsor of the project, which is the Chinese investor, okay, which it borrows money from the China Exim Bank or the China Development Bank. And then about 15 to 20%, so 75 to 80% is debt financing, and then about 15, 20% is equity, also by the Chinese investor. And that's how the power, and then there's of course a power purchase contract with the government of Pakistan, which is about 30 years, 40 years. In Pakistan, it's 30 years that Pakistan's Central Power Purchasing Agency will purchase electricity produced by the Chinese investor for the next 30 years. And similarly, we had major road projects. There's a Sakhar to Multan road project, about $3.5 billion project. That was a fusion of commercial and soft loans. So it was definitely a significant influx of investment in a country which was not familiar or used to or had experienced such large-scale investment in the past by any country. And it impacted the connectivity very well. And I want to share a report that we just published. I'm a co-author, Dr. Rafiq Dosani from the RAND Corporation in the United States, head of the Asia Pacific wing of RAND, and myself and my colleague Umar, we've co-authored this report on how this Sakhar to Multan motorway has impacted tourism and religious tourism, because there's Sufi shrines along this route within Pakistan. And the results, we did primary research and we visited these places, it's tremendous. Because people in Pakistan got mobility and access to visit these shrines. So it has stimulated local economy. But what has happened, if I may, and I might be exceeding time, is that the BRI has evolved.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So the BRI has evolved, and I think it's very important to understand. And how it has evolved is that when it began, China's economy was much stronger. It was much more, the GDP growth was 11, 12, 13%. It was higher. So China was more bullish. President Xi had just taken over as the president and general secretary of the Communist Party. And the global international competition had not accelerated to the extent that it has right now. And these investments were taking place. They were big ticket items, and they were SOE-led investments. Now, as the first decade of the Belt and Road has ended, and there was COVID in between, a big pandemic which affected everything, that bullishness is diluted. And Sinosure, which underwrites projects and financing for outbound investments, is much more prudent and cautionary, which means that the investments are now smaller scale, much more due diligence is taking place, and China is much more selective than it was in the past. And the SOEs are investing within China to stimulate China's economy as per President Xi's dual circulation directive, as opposed to investing outbound. So there's more private sector-led investment in the BRI from SOE. So that's one change. Second, the scale and magnitude of the investment has reduced. And third, they are much more prudent and less bullish. So I think these are three changes which has happened. And the fourth is greener investments, as China under President Xi takes a key role in climate change, championing climate change. So they're greener, more mindful and cognizant of how high in carbon or lack thereof those investments are.
Syed, Mr. Syed, thank you. A wonderful exploration. I think I know some stuff, but you gave in 3-4 minutes some nuggets of information that are absolutely, I think, why we have these conversations, because we don't understand around the world, especially Pakistan is only in the news quite often for the wrong things. It's a negative perspective, etc. So can I ask you just one point? And I was very pleased that you mentioned the power sector, the port, the airport, etc. Can you just give us a hint of, I don't know if you have any data, etc., but and you can't attribute any changes in the macroeconomic situation to the BRI, but maybe there's some data because you alluded to research you have done with the road. But particularly looking at energy and power, and we all know what blackouts used to be and all of that. How has that been a real transformation in Pakistan? And therefore, in terms of quality of life or GDP, any quantification that you can give us in terms of what percent of the population now have access to reliable electricity supply or something like that? That'd be very useful as well, because I learned a lot from your 5 minutes of, very specific things that people might not know. And I think I know. I tried to observe what's happening in Pakistan, but your insights were very useful. So I'm greedy for a bit more detail.
With pleasure, and thank you so much for your kind words of appreciation. So about 7,000 to 8,000 megawatts approximately have been added. So we have excess capacity now by these investments. And while I don't have the figure of how many people now have access to electricity compared to in the past, but this access to electricity includes both urban areas and rural areas.
Okay.
Because the lack of access to electricity included and transcended to urban centers. And when you talk about access to electricity, I'm referring to both domestic consumers and industrial consumers. Some factories at that time, I remember, had actually migrated to Bangladesh, had relocated to Bangladesh because of the electricity problem. And these power projects have given rise to and birth to industrial zones for companies to come back and relocate and have joint ventures with Chinese companies. So it was definitely a very major change to Pakistan's business environment. And during the 2013 to 2018 period, our GDP was between 3.8 to about, I think, 4.7 or 4.6, almost touching 5%, which is relatively high for Pakistan. So at that time, and the Moody's had given us I think a B plus or a rating at that time. So you can see what had happened. And right before that, if I remember, there was a Newsweek cover page in 2012 or 2011, just before the BRI investments took place, and it said that the most dangerous country in the world is not Iraq, it is Pakistan. And then these investments took place, and it sort of changed the game for Pakistan and made it strategically relevant as well, put it back on the radar for investors.
Great to know. And by the way, I asked the question about debt so that you could essentially make the point you made. so that you could have, because all the time we hear, in mainstream media, these are all debt traps, etc. So thank you for, responding.
Just one thing when you talk about debt, I have written a paper with the professor from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore on, which was published in Singapore in the university. Where is the money going? It's on CPEC, and at that time there was a lot of talk of debt as well. So it's compared multilateral institutions' debt and debt from China, and sort of try to dissect it.
Yes,
so,
that's a good one. So please send us a link if you can to the paper, and people can access it. It's a very good comparison when people look at those. So that is a nice way to now go and switch to Africa. As they say, if you want to talk about Africa, you should start in Nigeria. When I'm a South African, I say you have to start in South Africa. But Professor Ubi, great pleasure to have you on here. And you're very distinguished, a professor of international relations. I think you have several degrees, and you're also a visiting professor at many other universities, including Zhejiang University in China. The same question to you: how does it look like from Africa? Has the BRI been achieved its goals? Both Professor Wang and Mr. Said reflected from the positions what it achieved to do. Mr. Said talked about what it achieved in Pakistan. How does it feel like, and what is your assessment of progress to date? Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Mara, for having me on this auspicious meeting. And I'm glad, to bring greetings from the NI, Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, where I work as a director of studies. And, this particular meeting, it's one meeting that is supposed to give credence to what China is doing in Africa. I would say that the BRI is achieving its purpose. I've written some articles that talked about the BRI, the focus on Nigeria and the focus on Africa, where I've argued that I think Africa should not lose sight of the BRI, or Africa should not lose sight of its cooperation with China, because if you look at the history of countries in Africa, right from the period of colonialism, or even prior to that period, you find out that Africa has always been on the receiving side. Now, if you come down to Africa and you look at all the infrastructures that were built in Africa, they were built by the countries that colonized Africa, from area of raw material, or source of raw material to the ports. But with the BRI, a lot has changed since 2000, when Africa started engaging China. A lot has changed, and there are a lot of infrastructural footprints in Africa. I have also gone around some part of Africa to understudy the BRI project, like the Mombasa Railway, where it was being built, which has been completed. I was there. These are high-tech infrastructure that the Chinese have actually given to Africa. Now, if you come to the eastern part of Africa, where Mombasa is also, the Djibouti rail line, up to Ethiopia, and the Sudanese rail line up to, linking East Africa. Those ones, a lot of them have been completed. If you come to Nigeria, I must say that a lot too has been completed in Nigeria, like the Kaduna Abuja rail line, the light rail, which is the mass urban transit. If you come to Lagos, you see the Lagos Ibadan rail line. In fact, other infrastructure are in discussion. So I would like to say that the BRI is achieving a lot, but there's more to be done. And Africa has to engage China in a proper way, such that whatever the promise is, that can be fulfilled. Like I said in most forum, when I discuss, is that, you see, it is one thing to promise and another to fulfill that promise. Now, but I would like to say the challenge is the mainstream media, especially from the West, which has come up with the issues of debt trap, how Chinese loans to Africa, in terms of the contract with China when they're signing this contract, focus on debt trap, alleged there's an alleged ceding of infrastructure and sovereignty to China if the country cannot repay those loans. These accusations and concerns are Western propaganda, as far as that is what we see in Africa, to undermine the unprecedented relationship between Africa and China. On the contrary, I would say that such uninformed debates stem from skeptics and xenophobes, based on the lack of information, misinformation, and disinformation. Now, what I mean by lack of information is the fact that, you see, a lot of relationship agreements between China and Africa, they are shrouded in secrecy. We don't have data as much as you have data, especially when you're in China, the data are often not there. So a lot of people act based on what the media has now. And the propaganda is huge. Propaganda is huge in this part of the world. So there is always the problem of misinformation. So this situation in itself relates to the dissemination of incorrect or misleading information. This also further leads to disinformation, a situation in which false information is deliberately and often covertly spread to influence public opinion. And so that is why you see a lot of some scholars, talking about the debt trap in Africa. Some are blaming China for a whole lot. If you look at the mass media and the social media, you see the discourse on the recolonization of Africa, China is supporting rogue state and all that. But this whole thing actually marks the beginning of the debt trap discourse. But, from research over the years that I've done, I think this is a myth. This is not real. This is not something that is actually what is on the ground. Because when you come on the ground, you're seeing this infrastructure. And like my government will always tell you, China is the only willing partner to want to invest in Africa where other partners have refused to invest. Because if you look at after colonialism, no new infrastructure, whether it's from the West, or from our former, or from the British who colonized us, you can't see anything new. And what China has come to do now is to upgrade those infrastructures and actually begin to build new ones. For instance, we have the coastal rail line that will run from Lagos up to Calabar. We're also talking about the Mambila power station, which the Chinese, in fact, as I speak to you, my government has just signed another new contract with China for about 2.something billion, million, I think 2.something billion or so, if I'm correct, loan for to build rail lines from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri and all that. So I think with this, when you come on the ground, there's no point to argue that China BRI is not working. It is, and there's a lot of prospect if we're able to manage the relationship well, and if we avoid media propaganda. I think we need to, right now, Africa does not need propaganda. Africa needs to see what is on the ground. We are looking for development. And so for me, I would say that it is high time the West and the Chinese government cooperate for the global South development and for Africa's development. That is what we are looking for. If you are following the discussion globally now, Africa is actually moving towards a new global governance because the present governance system is already in disorder. There's chaos everywhere, there's uncertainty everywhere. And Africa is asking for a new multilateral system, a new multipolar system that is different from the existing one. And so I think if we are able to come together as developing countries in concerted effort under collectivization, we have a way, to be able to push Africa forward and push the global south forward in terms of how we engage each other. I think the future is collectivization, where the groupings of developing countries will come together and see how they can push their development further and create an inclusive development that is anti-disparity, that is based on equity and justice.
Thank you, Professor. That incredible insights. I lived in Africa for 4 or 5 years, so I have a flavor of what you're saying. I think a lot of us who are not that familiar with Africa forget the scale of the continent, the levels of deprivation that were left behind after the colonial era, and all the things that you talked about. The infrastructure was built mainly to take raw materials to ports, and now something else is different. I have one question for you, which I thought, you said something which got me thinking, and I hope you might elaborate. You said something that African countries need to get better at engaging with China in a proper way.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in what you meant, because I think quite often when I meet people who say, if I'm speaking in Europe, China's the new colonizer, etc., my typical response is, well, the Chinese haven't gone with guns and priests, but they're making deals. They could be slightly unfair deals, etc., and that should be incumbent on African governments to get better deals, etc. But they're not putting a gun to your head and saying, do this or else, or taking the raw materials. So I'm keen to get your perspective on what should, after all, China is a powerful nation, etc. And there is no running away that when you're more powerful, you have more clout, even in fair negotiations. So what is it that African countries that should do better in engaging with China?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think quite an impressive question. Over the years, I've realized that many African countries, when they go to international fora, they hardly negotiate for what will guarantee mutual benefit, and but much more importantly, many African countries do not have policy of engagement with the powers, with advanced countries or economically developed countries. They don't have any policy of engagement. For instance, you could see that there's a China-Africa policy. And so all engagement between China and Africa will revolve on that, whether it's with individual countries, it will revolve on that policy. Now there's a US-Africa policy, there's UK-Africa policy, there's EU-Africa policy. And what I have not seen is, maybe except for South Africa, is maybe a Nigerian-US policy or a Nigerian-China policy. I think this is where we have to begin from, because if you have a policy of engagement, written down, in terms, so you'll be able at any particular time in a meeting, what you want. So our foreign policy should be deliberate, So when you go to sit with the Chinese or you sit with the Americans, you know what you want at any particular time. I think that's where we begin from. Now, the next point I raised was the issue which I talked about is the issue of promise and fulfilling that promise. Yes. So if you even look at the FOCAC documents, the FOCAC document is heavily pregnant with a lot of promises, including technology transfer, including fight for peace and against insecurity. All that should be something that should be pragmatic. But how do we go about that? I think we have to sit down again and look at the issues that individual African countries needs, and how to go about it. I understand, and which I quite agree with you, Professor, that you see, the Chinese don't use guns or don't put guns on your head, and they negotiate with you. It is what you have agreed with that they come out with. I have told people the Chinese will never come and enforce anything. They have to negotiate with you. But one area too that the Chinese will have to, maybe in the nearest future, be more pragmatic and engage the African countries is in the area of peace and security, which is ravaging the continent, especially the Sahel. From my study, I realized that the Chinese prefer, in terms with issues related to peace and security, they prefer to engage with the multilateral organization like the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States. But where the hotspots of this insecurity, those countries, the Chinese are actually not engaging directly with them. So I think that has to change. With the issue of infrastructure, I wouldn't subscribe to coming to Africa to build social infrastructures like the presidential palaces. Well, you can do social corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility, but when it comes to we need productive infrastructure. If we have productive infrastructures, we can actually begin. That's actually the foundation for development, the takeoff of Africa's development. A lot of African countries are not industrialized. And like we ask ourselves, scholars in Africa, we keep 60 years after independence, over 60 years, why has Africa not moved forward? Why have we not been able to industrialize? Is it that the sciences we are taught here is different from the sciences that are being taught in China or taught in America? I think the foundation of science is the same everywhere. So why are we suppressed? Why are we being suppressed to disallow that takeoff of industrialization? Now, another thing that the Chinese have to do differently is that they should begin to outsource and offshore some part of their enterprises, which is also part of the FOCAC agreement. They don't have to treat us the same way we were treated under colonialism and after colonialism, post-colonial period, where you just come, take the raw materials and take it to Africa and produce goods and now bring it back as finished goods and sell it to us at an exorbitant price. We need that to change. So for instance, if you go to Ethiopia, the shoe industry, which is one of the most the biggest shoe industry in the world in Zhejiang province, they have outsourced some of the part of the company to Ethiopia. Now, other places where there are other places where they have outsourced some of their companies. So I think many of these companies too should begin to outsource to Africa. There's nothing bad if the companies come to Africa and Nigeria and produce maybe a pen and say made in Nigeria. It's still, it gives us credibility. Yes. It shows that the relationship is mutual, the relationship is moving forward. So BRI should take into consideration those aspects of the relationship. Yes, it's not just about cultural exchange or people-to-people exchange, financial integration. So it should go beyond that and not just infrastructure, because the infrastructure can be there if the companies, the industries are not there. Of what purpose is the infrastructure? The infrastructure, if it is road, the rail line, is supposed to move market and all that, and for export too.
Thank you, Professor. That's wonderful. I really appreciate also you bringing into focus the issue of how does China through the BRI also get involved, and this is the touchy issue with regard to peace and security through development, and I'd like to hear more. So this is a nice way for me to bring back Professor Yong Wang. Professor, you've heard someone from Pakistan talk about these issues. You've heard someone from Nigeria talk about these issues, etc. I'm sure people are thinking, what does Professor Yong Wang think about all of this from a Chinese perspective and a serious academic who has looked at all of this? So over to you to just respond to what we've heard in the last 15, 20 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Nair. So there's an old Chinese saying, which is that if you want to get rich, build road first. I think for developing countries, industrialization is not only just the good way, but I think it is a unique way to escape the low-income trap, to escape the middle-income trap. So, initially, the infrastructure is public good. So I think the China's National Development Bank and all SOEs can take the lead and invest a lot. It's a kind of public investment. Hopefully, that will help crowd in private investment, both in host countries and also from China. So I do see, once you have those electricity, having the roads, and then both the private firms in the Belt and Road countries and Chinese private firms would have incentive to do business, to establish the plans and so on and so forth. So infrastructure investment is the first step. I think it is a key step. And this is China's secret. I think this is also something that could be crucial for developing countries. So this is the first thing. And the second thing, I think it is not just Belt and Road Initiative, it's a cooperation. It's not just about the capital flow. It's not just about trade flow. It's not just about technology flow, but also it's about idea flow. How to get the development strategy correct. I'm very proud to have some international students from all the BRI countries. So, in Peking University, there is an institute called Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development. I have the privilege to supervise several PhD students from BNR countries, including one Pakistan student whose name is Urfa Iqbal, and her dissertation is about
She's a good friend of mine.
China. Yeah, okay, great. So China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, so CPEC. So it is a single sort of a project. It has a high target, but so far, honestly speaking, it has not achieved its full potential. So how to make it more effective? This is exactly what her book is about. I think this idea flow is crucial. And I think so many people might be interested in how is the kind of BNI strategy different from the old sort of, how the Western countries help developing countries. From my observation, I think one key difference is that the key words are different. So in Western countries, they are also philanthropists. They also want to really help Africa, for example. But the key words in their mind is human capital. That is health and education. Okay, and so they spend a lot of money to help improve the health and improve education, to increase the human capital. This is certainly correct. This is a noble thing to do. But there's still gap between having human capital and industrialization. What is the key word from China's strategy? Job. So because China's development stage is closer to other BNI countries. China started as a very, very poor country, even poorer than South Sahara region. So there are a lot of labor-intensive industries, these traditional industries, and they are now gradually, losing the comparative advantage in China because the wage go up. But these industries are particularly very consistent with comparative advantage of many developing countries. So I do see some Chinese private entrepreneurs who in the apparel industries and the garment industry, they move their business to Ethiopia, to many developing countries. And why? Because these entrepreneurs, they know the technology, they know the world of marketing, they know how to manage firm. But these traditional industries have already disappeared in United States for decades. Okay, so for China, it's a mutually beneficial thing. So once the infrastructure are there in Belt and Road countries now, and the labor-intensive industries are typically considered with a comparative advantage because they are low-income countries. So that really help engage this effective foreign direct investment, and also consistent with the comparative advantage and determined by the factor endowment structure in the developing countries. So that really is an effective way to achieve industrialization. This is exactly what China did. Okay, so I think and this job is important. So long the workers in the African countries, you have enough skills to work in that factory. You do not really need to have a formal degree, a college degree, but so long as your skills are really in a match, and then after a certain time of training, I think African people are good people. They quickly learn. So and then they just so jobs. Once you have jobs, then you have revenues, then you have tax revenues, then you have more public goods infrastructure, and then this is a virtual cycle. So I think this key idea is very different. So. And from new structural economic point of view, so how to really achieve economic development for a developing country, we should start from what we have, our endowment structure, and to see what industries are considered with a comparative advantage. And then we let the market do the job and also have facilitating state, then gradually work. But the mainstream Western style sort of this prescription is opposite. They would give advice to developing country like this. Look at what you do not have. Look at what rich country have. And use a rich country as a benchmark, and now look at you. Your lack of technology, your lack of modern industry, your lack of modern education, your lack of modern financial industry, your lack of rule of law, you lack everything. How to do it? Just make up, do exactly what we do. This is wrong. You have goodwill, but it is not effective. New structural economics or China's experience tell you should start from what you have. Based on what you have, you are a 5-year-old kid, and now you got sick. So what is your benchmark model? Your benchmark model should be a 5-year healthy kid instead of 25-year healthy adult. So you really need to look at your own development strategy. What is your comparative advantage? And once your industries develop and following comparative advantage and accumulate capital faster, and when the endowment structure gradually also upgrade, right? So your capital accumulate, the price of capital goes down, and the industry is gonna also upgrade to more and more capital intensive, to more and more skill intensive, and then you are on the right track. So I think these are the key methodological difference, approach difference, and I think that is what the Belt and Road initiative, how that differ from old traditional way, which have already been proven wrong by history. Let me just stop here.
Professor Yong, absolutely brilliant intervention. I could see Professor Ubi nodding. I could see Mr. Syed also in agreement. I think you brought some great wisdom there, particularly the thing that is, as you say, we start with what we have. And not aspire to create things we don't even have an ability to. And as you very importantly said, the difference is just having goodwill doesn't actually can't be the anchor of a strategic plan for development. Can I just ask you for a 30-second response to Professor Ubi's remark about, how can we have the pens made in Nigeria rather than a Chinese pen made in Nigeria? You see what I think the commonly made criticism of some of the Chinese companies going on offshoring. I know it's a complex issue, but if you could give us a quick response to that, 30 seconds or so, I'd appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I think Nigeria is a populous country, and its comparative advantage clearly consists. It lies in the rather cheap labor. So there are millions of choices for labor-intensive industries. So what is important is really for Nigeria to find out what is consistent with your comparative advantage. So it could be pens, it could be apparels, it could be some other things. So I think that what is crucial is that really even in Nigeria is a big country, even different region in Nigeria. So you have different endowment structure, factor endowment structure different, natural endowment structure different, institutional endowment structure different. So your comparative advantage could be different. So I think what is really important is look at the local kind of conditions, and then and for China is now losing the comparative advantage in many labor-intensive industries. Mm-hmm. So there's a big room for the industry takeover by African countries, including Nigeria. So I think there's a big room.
Thank you very much, Professor. Professor, can I ask you, if you don't mind, that is hopefully of help to you as well, some of the things you said about your ideas about the what we have as a focal point for development and also the jobs, etc. If you have a book that essentially outlines this, please share it in the chat, even the name, etc. I, for one, would love to read it, and I'm sure there are many others. So please do share something that you think could be recommended, even if it's in Chinese. Don't worry, we'll all find a way to read it. So thank you. Now let me move back to Mr. Saeed. Mr. Saeed, you gave us a lot of good information about Pakistan, but you've heard the input from Professor Ubi. You've heard the response from Professor Wang as well. So how do you relate that? And maybe to be a bit more specific, can I ask you, you painted a positive picture, which is great. I think all of us would like to see Pakistan move up the trajectory in a big way. It's a complex nation. So with all of these investments, and you said BRI is one of the key things that's triggering reform and change, where do you see Pakistan in 30 years with this sort of, you said it was the first time that this kind of money came in, etc. So, two questions in there. Please share your thoughts with us, please.
I think that I just shared with you what I witnessed in Pakistan. So the picture that I've painted is an eyewitness account.
Yes,
I would say. And second, I see Pakistan in a great position in 30 years. We have a youth bulge, demographic dividend. We are globally relevant economically and politically. There's investment happening in Pakistan, and we have a blossoming middle class. We have over 65 million internet users, with smartphone users, and our economy has stabilized. But I have heard our friend from Nigeria. It's a very important country, and there's a lot happening in Africa. There's one article that I would recommend, which was in the Washington Post a few years ago by a group of Johns Hopkins researchers about BRI in Africa. It's called "The U.S. Policymakers Get China in Africa All Wrong." And it's a fantastic analysis of BRI. It's slightly dated, but I think it still holds. And I also heard a professor from the Peking University, which is also my alma mater, by the way. I spent almost a year in 2019 in Peking University. But I think I want to add one point, which I think would render this conversation incomplete if we do not discuss it. And that is the communication strategy of the BRI.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we've talked about the advantages to Africa and Pakistan, what China's outline is, the professor has said, and how industrialization for global South. But we are having this event right now, and your think tank, GIFT, is, I think, done a remarkable job. And you had a communication strategy, right? You partnered with Pakistan-China Institute for Communication, for marketing of this and others. But China decided to undertake a huge mammoth initiative, which would obviously, create waves, both positive and
yes.
Some would look at that skeptically. It would ruffle some feathers. But we saw that there was no sophisticated, nuanced communication strategy that comes with such a large project. And this is I would say, the single most largest foreign policy initiative of China since the opening up and reform of Deng Xiaoping. And we see that the lack of the communication strategy, I saw the communication strategy to be learning on the job. But there was not a well thought out, crafted communication strategy where the SOEs, the publicity department of Chinese government and Ministry of Foreign Affairs was present, a coordinated, coherent, intertwined strategy for the countries this was happening in, and also for the Western audience. So we saw a very defensive approach to the BRI. We saw an onslaught from the West, like our friend from Nigeria mentioned, and then we saw defensive, reactive mechanism of responding to those criticisms rather than a preemptive, initiative-based, innovative approach that we see coming from the West, which is more honed, more sophisticated. So I think that has been a that has a lack of communication strategy, I think, has adversely impacted the Belt and Road's image in not only in the Western hemisphere, but I would say that also in a lot of the global South countries. So it's very important that as the second decade of the Belt and Road has started in 2023, that is honed, that is troubleshooted, and that is improved. Because the topic of this dialogue that you are hosting is taking stock. So I think this is very important to take stock, because if there is so much investment, but that investment should, for any major power or major player, should yield soft power, should wield soft power. So we see that more could have been done in that regard. Just wanted to add that.
I think that's such an astute observation. I think, as you rightly said, this conversation would be wholly incomplete if we didn't discuss this. And I want to thank you for being so observant and making this remark. I can tell you that our efforts together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs through the Commissioner's Office in Hong Kong is actually part of a more oblique communication channel. And I think my Chinese friends will also agree with me that we all think, friends of China, that they should improve their comms and PR. And that's why we're all here, not as PR agents, but as people who want to communicate from the ground in Nigeria, from the ground in Pakistan, and in the series we've done from the ground in Europe, in Australia, and elsewhere. So such an important point. I could not, say anything more, that you've added something so important to this. We've got about 10 minutes left. Professor Ubi, you've heard the response from Professor Wang on this issue of start with what we have, and just not just focusing on Nigeria, but the African experience as well. And as someone who lived in Africa for a while, I couldn't agree more with Professor Wang's statement, and also from Asia, that quite a lot of the development aid is, here's what you need to do to be like us. And I don't want to make it a sort of divisive argument, but where's the policy making? Coming back to your point about, we need to be able to negotiate what we want and get good advice. And to the point that Professor Wang made as well, about the BRI is also about ideas. So where the idea is coming from in Africa that helps shape this thing, and then targets it to what we have, and therefore what we need. And we need to do ourselves. So over to you.
Yeah, and thank you once again for the opportunity. I listened to my distinguished colleagues, of Professor Said and Professor Wang, and there's a question of a focus of Professor Wang where he talked about what industries we have in Africa. I wouldn't accept the fact that we should look at comparative advantage, because when you talk about comparative advantage, what we can produce, what we can do, you found that the International Division of Labor has already placed Africa in a particular dimension, and the dimension is that Africa produces the raw material. Why we don't want to be producing raw materials? We want to also add values to that raw material. So when you say comparative advantage, or start from what you have, then you're still telling me to go back to plantations, excavating minerals, from our exploration of minerals and all that, and the drilling of oil and keep selling. So that is beyond that. What I mean by outsourcing is, if we are producing crude oil, why don't you come set up a refinery here? If it's it's your company. Like you all rightly noted, Nigeria is 1/4 of Africa's market. Nigeria is 3/4 of ECOWAS market. So if you have the Nigerian market, it's as good as having a larger chunk of African market. That is just the beginning, So I think that the industries, the outsourcing, offshoring of some aspect of the industry should be one of the key considerations in our relationship with China. Now, I really like what Professor said. He talked about communication. I think I need to address that too, in my own little way. You see, when I speak with a Chinese audience, I tell them, just leave propaganda to the West. They are so good at propaganda. Now, the Chinese is actually not good with propaganda. And I don't know whether it's a policy that they don't want to get in propaganda, or they don't want to let out, a lot of information. But I think it is high time, because it is based on this lack of information, like I said, and misinformation, that is creating the disinformation about China, about the Belt and Road Initiative. I think the Chinese should begin to change that aspect of their foreign policy. Yeah, propaganda. In fact, you study it as a course in the university, under international relations or political science. And so the Chinese need to begin to, know how to come about information and use information. I don't want to call it propaganda, but however they have to do it, but just to portray to the world that they are not what the world think they are, you know. Before I conclude, I would like to address the issue of the Belt and Road Initiative. Like I said, it's a myth. It's a myth, and this is what my minister of our Nigeria's minister of information said, that the debt trap narrative claiming that China is using BRI to influence African countries is an insult to African countries. And I've said this while he has seen it from that perspective, I have discussed with a lot of fellow colleagues. You see, when they discuss on rivalry in Africa, US-China rivalry in Africa, US emerging economies rivalry, you trivialize Africa. You make Africa look like a cake that can be shared among people. You take us back to 1884, 1885, where Africa map was kept on the table and dissected amongst the superpowers. I think the 21st century, we should move beyond that. We shouldn't be talking about rivalry. Why do we talk about rivalry? Why can't we talk about cooperation for Africa's development, cooperation for the global South development? These are the things that we need to do. And if you come to Africa, the data shows that we are no countries in a debt trap. For instance, out of about 20-something billion dollars that we owe to the multilateral, I'm in terms of our bilateral debt, it's 20-something billion dollars. We are owing China only 4 billion. So where is the debt trap discourse? Where's the debt trap in all this? Now, let me take you back to the 1980s and 1990s, where there was also the debt trap discourse. As at that time, China was still not really open. China was still closed. So who was Africa owing at that time? So you see, this is all part of the propaganda. Now, the whole history of that, the debt trap in the 80s or in the 70s, 80s, 90s, is all lost. Now we're talking about a new debt trap. When many countries in Africa are owing maybe just 3%, 4%. So these are the things that China needs to take into consideration and be able to reel out information, such that the populace will have access to this information and be able to analyze, intuitively whether China is supporting rogue state, whether China is coming back to recolonize Africa, or whether China is going to take Africa's sovereignty.
Thank you, Professor. I got 2 minutes left. I'm sure the audience will allow me to go on a bit by extra minute. So I'm going to give you all the last word on this. So, Professor, I'm going to, since you spoke last, Professor Ubi, in 30 seconds or a bit more, but not more than a minute at the most, where do you see the BRI going over the next, because, here we are taking stock. Where do you see the BRI going in the next 10 years in Africa? I've only got the luxury of giving you a minute. And what must China do? 1 minute, please. Next 10 years.
Just 1 minute, yes. I will stick to my 1 minute, and maybe less than a minute. I see the next 10 years as a prospect for our relationship for countries in Africa and China. With regards to the BRI, I think more effort should be put into the initiative, to be able to maximize its benefit. Now, I will conclude by saying that, you see, it is one thing to promise and another thing to fulfill. whether it is under the platform of FOCAC or under the platform of the Belt and Road Initiative or even the Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative. These are all initiatives of the Chinese government. And at the last FOCAC promises of President Xi Jinping, I think all this should come to fruition. It shouldn't just be another paper discussion. Will let us begin to see the, the infrastructures on the ground, and we'll begin to see a new development model. And I'll conclude by saying that it is high time Africans understand that development is a deliberate process. Now we can also learn lessons of development from China. We can adopt and adapt what fits into our social structural dynamics and not just copy development model and not just wait for prescription from whether the Chinese or from the West. I think that Africa needs to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Obi. Really good. The ability to cooperate rather than divide, and also that China's Africa should lead that process rather than be dependent. And that process, hopefully, the BRI is initiated. Mr. Saeed, your 1 minute to conclude on where do you see all of this leading in the next 10 years in Pakistan, and what one piece of advice would you give apart from better comms in terms of the relationship between Pakistan and China?
Yes, I think that Pakistan has already shown success for the larger BRI for Chinese companies. I think that better assimilation with local community, better understanding of the stakeholders apart from the central government in global South countries where Chinese companies operate, like media, civil society, think tanks, local communities where the project is, and better CSR would, I think, yield more success for BRI and future investments. And I see a positive trajectory of Pakistan in the overall BRI index.
Very good. And, you know, I think your point about the long-term benefits to Pakistan with the specifics you gave resonates with many. It certainly resonated with me. I want to go and research some of this because a lot of us don't know anything about this. So maybe your institution also could do some publicity and tell the world about the great things you're doing, what's being achieved. Finally, Professor Wang, you've heard, I'm assuming the Chinese government listens to you. What advice would you give the Chinese government based on what you heard? So much positive stuff, but as we all know, and this, I think this ingrained in the Chinese thinking, there's always room for improvement. So in 1 minute, what do you think the next 10 years should be, and what advice would you give the Chinese government?
Okay, first of all, I think I'm very confident about the future of the Belt and Road Initiative because I think it is a kind of joint effort of all developing countries who seek for economic prosperity and development. So today's world is very complicated. Many geopolitical forces are there, but I think all developing countries, especially in Belt and Road countries, want to have peaceful economic prosperity, and this is, and the BNI initiative is mutually beneficial. I think it's really like, what I see is a really great effort for the global South to work together to add more stability of the world economy. Now, China contributes to 30% of world economic growth in the past 10 years, but I think the one BNI initiative are more successful, that would imply that the global welfare will be greatly enhanced. So I think my only advice or suggestion to China's government is that, okay, listen to all the partners of BNI countries and find the obstacles, find the challenges, and find the solutions together. Saying this is a noble thing to do. This is not only the good for other countries, but also good for China as well. So let's do it more effectively.
Professor Wang, thank you so much. And this question about listening, I think there's a lot of room for even creating some kind of BRI dialogue forum that is separate from just the usual formats. And I think we're hearing that very clearly from this, and that could possibly be an outcome. So I'm hugely frustrated that we have run out of time. I find this so intellectually engaging that I could sit with you all, gentlemen, for another hour, and I'm sure the audience will all hang with this. But, we don't have limitless time. So can I just say, thanks a million for joining us, sharing us with your insights. It's been intellectually extremely stimulating. Lots of questions. I couldn't go through all of them. So on behalf of everyone, the organizers, etc., thank you so much. And now I'll hand over to our MC, who will start the next session.